But now let's turn in our Bibles to the book of 1 Kings. Book of 1 Kings. We've been going through, starting a series in the divided kingdom. And we've been mostly in the book of 1 Kings. And we'll be there again today. We're in 1 Kings chapter 14. And again, this is a very interesting time period in the Bible of when the kingdom of David and Solomon had split into two. And so now we have wars between the two kingdoms. We have some interesting characters of kings and prophets. And the Bible records what they did, whether it was good or whether it was bad, and things that we need to learn from, and things we can learn about God and how He reacted and what He said through His prophets. But as we get to chapter 14, we're going to see that God is a just judge. Just like the passage we read earlier, God is no respecter of persons. He's going to judge you righteously. What makes God such a good judge? Well, this account in 1 Kings chapter 14 is going to show us several ways that God is a just judge. And first of all, let's look at verses 1 through 6, because we're going to learn there that God cannot be deceived. He's a good judge because He can't be deceived. You can't trick Him. Let's read in 1 Kings chapter 14. I'll read aloud verses 1 through 6. If you have a Bible with you, you can open it up and follow along with us. At that time, Abijah the son of Jeroboam fell sick. And Jeroboam said to his wife, "Arise, I pray thee, and disguise thyself, that thou be not known to be the wife of Jeroboam, and get thee to Shiloh. Behold, there is a prophet, Ahijah the prophet, which told me that I should be king over this people. And take with thee 10 loaves and cracknels and a cruse of honey, and go with him, and go to him. He shall tell thee what shall become of the child." And Jeroboam's wife did so, and arose and went to Shiloh, and came to the house of Ahijah. But Ahijah could not see, for his eyes were set by reason of his age. And the Lord said unto Ahijah, "Behold, the wife of Jeroboam cometh to ask a thing of thee for her son, for he is sick. Thus and thus shalt thou say unto her, for it shall be, when she cometh in, that she shall feign herself to be another woman." And it was so, when Ahijah heard the sound of her feet, that she came in at the door, that he said, "Come in, thou wife of Jeroboam. Why feignest thou thyself to be another? For I am sent to thee with heavy tidings." As we see in the story, Jeroboam had a big problem. His son, who was named Abijah, the same name as the Rehoboam's son who reigned in the southern kingdom, had become very sick. And it must have been fairly serious for him to take such drastic measures as to go to the man of God, the prophet, when for so many years he had completely rejected the true God of Israel and set up, as we've seen already, a rival religious system, including the golden calves worship. It is assumed that this was such a serious situation because Abijah was the firstborn, and he was to be the next king. And yet, he was so seriously ill that they wanted to ask God what would become of their child. And so Jeroboam, he thinks about all the prophets that he knows of that he could go to, and he remembers one in particular named Ahijah. Because this is the same prophet who had come to him and told Jeroboam, "Jeroboam, you are going to take away 10 of the tribes from the kingdom of Solomon to yourself, and you will be king and reign over them. And Jeroboam, if you're a good king, I'll establish your kingdom forever." But he remembers that. And of course, Jeroboam wasn't a good king. And so God said since then that, no, I won't give it away. He's about to tell him what's going to happen with his dynasty. So he thought, well, of all the prophets out there, I'll go to him because he's given me good news before. I mean, he said I would be king, and look, I'm king. But let's not let him know that it's us. Told his wife, pretend to be somebody else. Pretend to be just some random woman out there from Israel, and go ask if our son is going to get well. But that didn't really work out because God told Ahijah who was coming. And he said that she's going to try to disguise herself. You know, it should have turned out in their favor, because when they got there, they realized that, oh, this Ahijah, he can't even see. Well, we didn't have to spend so much time on this disguise, perhaps. He can't even see. But actually the opposite was true, because he really was a prophet. And he knew right away who they were and what they wanted to know. There's a saying that you can fool some people all the time, and you can fool all the people some of the time, but you can't fool God. And this came to be true. Maybe you're good at fooling people. Maybe you're good at pretending to be what you're supposed to be. But God knows. He knows before you even get there, before you even go to prayer. He knows what's really in your heart. And He knows how you've really been living, and what you really believe, and what your real motives are. Those cannot be hidden from God. You know, we can memorize some nice prayers. And oftentimes, Estonian Christians talk about memorizing and reciting prayers for meals and such. And we can learn some nice little prayers that rhyme and sound good, and we can figure out how to talk and how to dress. But God really knows what's going on in our hearts. He knows what we've been doing throughout the week. We can put on a good show. And unfortunately, coming to church makes it easy for that couple hours a week to put on a good show. You come and you're dressed the right way, and you know what to do, you know what to say. But what about the life that you've been living all week? Well, God knows about that. He knows exactly what you've been doing, what you've been thinking, what your heart really is going after. And so none of this could be hidden from God when the wife of Jeroboam went to Ahijah, because God is a just judge, because He can't be deceived. Maybe you could deceive a judge in a court case. I'm sure that happens quite often, that you actually deceived the people who were judging your case, but not so with God. But God is a just judge, not only because He can't be deceived, but also because He can't be charmed. We can't just kind of get on His good side and get Him to judge in our favor. Verse 3, did you notice what He told His wife to do? He says, take with you 10 loaves and cracknels and a cruse of honey, and go to him. He shall tell thee what shall become of the child. Well, this was a common practice. You go to the man of God, and you need to bring something, some kind of gift. And perhaps he was thinking with these gifts, not only to fulfill the custom, but maybe we can throw in some extra honey and things, and maybe he'll give us another good message. But that didn't work either, because God had a very specific message to Jeroboam that we'll see pretty soon. And all those gifts, all that disguise, none of that changed what God had to say and the judgment that God had for them. We know that God cannot be charmed with money. What does it say in Psalm 51? Psalm 51, I'll I'll try to turn there quickly. Psalm 51 verses 16 and 17 says, "For thou desirest not sacrifice, else would I give it. Thou delightest not in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, wilt thou not despise." And we know in Mark chapter 12, Jesus talks about all the rich men that were putting in lots of money into the temple treasury. And then comes along a poor old widow, and she gives in maybe a euro or two, or a few cents. She puts into the treasury, and Jesus says she gave more than any of those others, because she didn't just give out of her thousands that she had. She gave, that was all she had. And Jesus knew that, being the Son of God. Maybe those rich men thought that, well, don't I look good? Isn't God pleased? Look at how much I'm giving compared to the others. But actually, Jesus there, the Son of God, watching them, God Himself, He was judging, and He judged their offerings to be of much less value than the one that gave from her heart, because she actually gave everything that she had. Where was she going to get her next meal from? She probably didn't know at that point. But she felt the need to give to the Lord, even though giving meant giving everything. Well, you can't kind of get on God's good side with giving of your money, because what's more important is, why did you give it? Not so much how much, but why. Did you give it because you love God? Or did you give it because your mom and dad said you need to learn how to tithe, so you have to give $10 out of this $100 that you got for your birthday? Okay, fine. Hopefully I have enough to get whatever this thing is that I really wanted. Or did you give that 10 thinking, you know what? That's right, I do want to tithe. If I should give that to God, then I want to. And maybe I could even give a little more. Maybe there's a special offering in church the next night, and maybe I want to give that too. God can see why we do the things we do. It's not so much that we do it out of duty. And He cannot be charmed by punishing yourself. And sometimes children get funny ideas in their head. I can tell you a story about our youngest. Sometimes when he's gotten in trouble or he's done something kind of childish, it's like, Andrew, you just spilled the milk all over for whatever reason. And he looks at it, and oftentimes what he'll do is he'll start hitting himself, smacking himself on the forehead or something, or like punching himself. And almost as if, yeah, you do. I've seen you do it. Almost as if, maybe you don't even think about it, but almost as if, oh, look, I'm already punishing myself, so you don't have to punish me or get mad at me. I think sometimes we think of God that way. You remember the stories of Martin Luther and his struggles with understanding the grace of God. He took that to an adult level, not just smacking yourself on the head that, oh, look, I'm punishing myself. But, actually taking whips and whipping himself. There's stories of monks going out with barely any clothes on into the swamps in the middle of summer to be bit by mosquitoes until they were, faint from the attack of all the bugs, thinking that, depriving themselves of sleep, depriving themselves of food for, all these fasts that they do. And this is the whole idea of this monk living as a monk or as a nun. You're denying yourself this, life that you could live in the world, denying yourself any possessions and so on, trying to almost like make penance for the fact that you're a sinner. We think of our own punishments for ourselves, but that doesn't change the fact that God is going to pass judgment on us, and God is going to punish us. Well, we can't kind of charm God, or the word charmer is actually translating an Estonian word, and I couldn't think of a good English word in this place, but I'll just say charming him or getting on his good side. We can't do that, because God is a just judge, and He's not going to be bribed by those kinds of things. And so it didn't work for Jeroboam and his wife. Well, God is a just judge also because He can't be taken advantage of. Well, what do we mean by that? Let's go back to our text. 1 Kings chapter 14. And let's read on. Let's read verses 7 through 14. Let's see what happens next. Verse 7. Go tell Jeroboam, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, forasmuch as I exalted thee from among the people, and made thee prince over my people Israel, and rent the kingdom away from the house of David, and gave it thee, and yet thou hast not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments, and who followed me with all his heart, to do that only which was right in mine eyes. But thou hast done evil above all that were before thee. For thou hast gone and made thee other gods and molten images to provoke me to anger, and hast cast me behind thy back. Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel, and will take away the remnant of the house of Jeroboam, as a man taketh away dung, till it be all gone. Him that dieth of Jeroboam in the city shall the dogs eat, and him that dieth in the field shall the fowls of the air eat, for the Lord hath spoken it. Arise thou therefore, get thee to thine own house, and when thy feet enter into the city, the child shall die. And all Israel shall mourn for him and bury him, for he only of Jeroboam shall come to the grave, because in him there is found some good thing toward the Lord God of Israel in the house of Jeroboam. Moreover, the Lord shall raise him up a king over Israel, who shall cut off the house of Jeroboam that day. But what? Even now. For the Lord shall smite Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and He shall root up Israel out of this good land which He gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them beyond the river, because they have made their groves, provoking the Lord to anger. And He shall give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, who did sin, and who made Israel to sin. And Jeroboam's wife arose and departed, and came to Tirzah. And when she came to the threshold of the door, the child died. Jeroboam, up to this point, and actually during the rest of his reign as well, he had defied God, and he had blasphemed God. But now, he's going to ask God for some help. Jeroboam somehow thought that Ahijah had given him a good prophecy before, that he would become king. Maybe he would get another good prophecy from Ahijah. But you see, God is not some kind of emergency number that we can call when we get in trouble. That we can totally ignore God and live how we want to live, but then when we need help, we can come to Him and He'll give us all the help that we want. Well, it doesn't normally work that way. Sometimes God's very gracious and He'll give us that help anyway, but typically it doesn't work that way. And it didn't work that way for Jeroboam. There's reminds me of atheists. Atheists, they say that there is no God, and they say they believe there is no God, and yet they hate Him. They hate someone who doesn't exist. And often they ask the question, when something goes wrong in the world, well, where was God? Where was God? I can't tell you how many times Estonians have asked me that. Well, where was God? Look what's happened in Ukraine. Look what's happened in some earthquake, some volcano, some I don't know what. Some children died in an accident locally somewhere. Where was God? He wasn't there. He wasn't doing anything. But then when something goes wrong, we want to find help from Him. And oftentimes even so-called atheists turn out to be not so atheists when things are really going wrong. And they want His help suddenly. They want God to help them. And if He doesn't come to help, they accuse Him of being unjust. Like grown children, I've observed in some families, grown children don't really talk to their mom and dad anymore. They have their own life now, which is that happens when you grow up. But then they don't want to talk to mom and dad anymore. They don't want to hear mom and dad's advice. They really have nothing to say to them until they get in trouble, until they're in a bad situation, until they need money. Then they're calling mom and dad. Then they're writing a letter. Then they're typing to them on social media. Hey, mom and dad, I need some money. Can you help us out? Sometimes we treat God that way. I think of this whole, get into some politics things, but Black Lives Matter. What they've been demanding, defund the police, defund the police. Do you really know what you're saying when you say defund the police? If there are no police around, who are you going to call when something goes wrong, when you need help? I think you're going to want to call the police, right? If there's no police, who else is there to call? I don't know, the Boy Scouts or something. But yeah, that's not going to go well. We think that we can live how we want to, and then when things get bad, we can ask God for help. Jeroboam, for years, he had already established this false religion. He had defied God in every way that he could defy God. God said, you've been worse than anyone before you, Jeroboam. And now you're coming to me. And you want to hear that your son is going to get well. Well, no, he's not going to get well. God was a just God. Well, we've talked about accusing God of not being just. I may have misspelled that word, but he cannot be accused of being unjust. Because let's look at verse 13 again. It's a very interesting verse in the middle of all this doom and gloom and judgment. Verse 13 says, and all Israel shall mourn for him, that is for his son, and bury him. For he only of Jeroboam shall come to the grave, because in him there is found some good thing toward the Lord God of Israel in the house of Jeroboam. Very interesting here. God says this young man, this boy, I'm not sure how old he was at the time, he's going to die. But he's going to die because he's the only one that I've found something good in out of all the house of Jeroboam. I found something good in him. What was that good thing that he saw? Well, the Bible doesn't say any further what that might be. But God is explaining that He cannot be accused of wrongdoing. He's a just God and He's judging everyone individually. And He saw someone among all these evil people that had some good in him. Probably some kind of fear of God. Probably some kind of faith in God to some degree. And He decided, you know what? Everything that's going to happen to the rest of his family, it's not going to happen to him. He'll die now. And he will be the only one that will be buried properly in a grave. Everybody else in Jeroboam's family, it's not going to be that way. He said the dogs are going to eat them. He said so basically their bodies are going to be left out. The most disgraceful thing that could happen to someone who has died. That's going to happen, but not to Abijah. Not to him. Even Abraham knew that God would not punish the just along with the evil. If you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, God, I know you wouldn't do it. I know if there was 50 righteous people there in Sodom, you wouldn't destroy the whole city and those 50 righteous people along with them. You'd spare the whole city, wouldn't you? Well, God basically answered, well, yes, I would, but there's not 50 righteous there. And in fact, there wasn't even 10. We remember the story. Only Lot and his family, it turned out they were only able to get 4 people out of that city, and barely could rip them out of the city. They were so attached to it. But God didn't destroy them along with the wicked. And the same happens here with Abijah. He is spared, actually. Sometimes we can, it reminds me that sometimes we can misunderstand what God is doing in our life. Well, we look at this passage and we see, well, Abijah, he was one of the good guys. But God didn't heal him. He didn't save him. He let him die. God explains, no, that's not how it is. He's dying because I'm having mercy on him. Because something really bad is coming, but he'll be spared. Abijah's death was actually a blessing, is what God was trying to say. Have some of your plans kind of been frustrated? Some of the things that you've hoped to accomplish or hoped to do or wish you had, that you could do, it hasn't worked out. God seems to not have been answering your prayers for a specific thing. Sometimes the things that we want and the things that we think we should have, God doesn't give us to us. Because it's actually a blessing, not that we get them, but it's a blessing that we don't get them. And sometimes we don't understand, and maybe in this life we might not ever realize why God never let us have that, or never cured us of that, or never answered that prayer. Like we thought that, well, if He's a good God, He would want to answer it that way. But God kind of reveals it to us here. Abijah died. And that was good. This was a blessing. And I'm telling you why. I know back in the early 2000s, there was a lot of foreigners came to Estonia and started making investments in this country. And some came with considerable capital, and they were able to buy properties and start to rent them out and kind of set up business here in Estonia. And I know one particular gentleman in particular. He tells me this story of how he came and things were going very well. Actually, he was able to buy several properties, and he had a really nice sporty car. And he even romantically, his life was going well, and he was able to hang out with the other foreigners who were, also doing well and had money. But he says that actually during that time, looking back, he had so much more to worry about. He began to find out that many Estonians were quite jealous of him, a foreigner coming in, doing much better than they are. And many of them would go out of their way to make trouble for him and make things difficult if they could. And that nice car that he had, well, it got stolen right off the street, just below the window where he had his apartment. He was sleeping. One of the very best properties that he had was basically stolen away from him for trusting somebody that turned out really couldn't be trusted. Actually was going to take advantage of his kindness. But now he would tell you that it's actually turned out to be a blessing not to have all those things anymore, to drive, average car. not to have so many things that people are so jealous of, it's actually turned out to be a blessing. Maybe you wonder why aren't I rich? Or why can't I have all these things? Well, we might not be able to understand it now, but maybe God knows that if we had those things, we wouldn't be quite as happy as we think we would be. Maybe God is not giving us those things because it's actually a blessing. I know sometimes young people struggle with this, and children struggle with, well, hey, why can't I have a cool, iPhone or an Android phone like all my friends have? Why can't I go to the movies like other people my age do? Or why can't I have those kinds of clothes? Or why can't I hang out with them? And why am I so restricted? Well, it's probably a blessing. Even if you don't understand it now, it's probably a great blessing that those boundaries are set and that there's certain places you're not allowed to go, certain things you're not allowed to do. Even if you can't understand it now, looking back, you realize, you know what? God and, my parents, God through my parents as well, and people around me, pastor, there were so many protective barriers put around me. And I realize now, if I had been allowed to go with those friends, if I'd had the freedoms to do the things I thought that I had the right to do, I probably would have made some very foolish decisions and done some things I regret. I can tell you stories about young people that are grown now that had those freedoms and did those things and have great regrets. So let's not ever accuse God of how He's treating us, what He's doing to us, because He's a righteous judge. He could never be accused of evil or of punishing the righteous along with the evil. But there's one more thing in this passage that makes God a just judge, and it's that God accepts no excuses. He will take no excuses. Let's go back to verses 15 and 16. It says, "For the Lord shall smite Israel." When he says Israel, he means talking about the whole nation, not just Jeroboam. "For the Lord shall smite Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and He shall root up Israel out of this good land which He gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them beyond the river, because they have made their groves, provoking the Lord to anger. And He shall give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, who did sin, and who made Israel to sin." Well, when we get to those verses, maybe somebody's thinking, now hold on, Jeroboam's the bad guy. What's all this about all of Israel? I mean, the whole problem is with Jeroboam. He needs to be taken out. There's nothing wrong with the people. But God explains, no, they all went along with it. And I hold them responsible too. There's no excuses. They might say, well, look, I mean, we've got Jeroboam as our king. I mean, what did you expect us to do? I mean, he already has these golden calves. He already has these, high places there. I mean, what did you expect? We wouldn't go to them? Well, of course we went to them. God says, yes, you did, and you're responsible for that. We can't just say, well, everybody else was doing it, and everybody else thought so, and everybody else was saying it. And so, of course, I did too. God says that's not an excuse. All those people that had sinned along with Jeroboam, they're also going to be punished. And so He gives the punishment. And for the first time, God pronounces that there is going to be this mass exodus from the land. They will be taken and carried away to a foreign land. Here we have the first pronouncement of that. Some people might say, hey, listen, my father, he was a big drinker. He drank all the time. So, I mean, it's kind of hereditary, so I drink as well. I mean, how could God judge me for that? Someone says, well, I grew up and my mother, she was always criticizing me. And she was always so hard with me and chewing me out for things. And so, I mean, you can't judge me really if I say harsh things to people around me. You can't blame me for that. Or listen, my brother did it first. I did it second. So I don't get in trouble, right? Because he hit me first, I hit him back. But only he gets in trouble. God says, no. No, you're both in trouble. You both did it. Jeroboam, he was kind of leading the way, and he made it easy for you to do it. But if you did it, that was your choice, right? And so, God is going to judge you according to your own deeds, not someone else's. And we can't blame it on somebody else. God is a just judge. He's a just judge for several reasons. You can't deceive him. You can't charm him. You can't take advantage of him and just ask for his help when you want it and otherwise ignore him. You can't blame him for anything, for mistreating anyone, because we see that God judges exactly correctly. Even giving mercy to this Abijah who was in this evil family. And finally, we can't give any excuses. God won't accept any excuses. Hey, if you committed this sin, then by your own works I'm going to judge you. The circumstances aren't so important. Well, let's remember that God is a just judge, and let's live in light of that, knowing that the life that we live now, we're going to give an account to the Lord, and He's going to judge us righteously. And we can't blame anyone else for what we've done. We take full responsibility ourselves, and we know that He's going to judge us right.